We have been discussing the question of whether non-Jewish ownership of the land of Eretz Israel uproots the sanctity of the land and obviates Shmita on that land. And we've seen that's a debate among some authorities, and let's look at some more now. The Rambam in Hilchos Truma Perek Aleph Halacha Yud says, Akum Shekana Karka Be'eretz Israel, a non-Jew who acquires land in Eretz Israel, Lo Hifkiya min mitzvos, he has not uprooted the mitzvos from that land, Elaharihi b'Kadosha, but it still retained its sanctity. Lפיכך, therefore, Im Chazer Yisrael velakחה ממנו, if a Jew comes and purchases the land from the non-Jew, אינה ככיבוש יחיד, it's not like an individual's conquest land. There are two types of conquest of conquering Eretz Israel. There's the kivbush rabim. There's when it's done by all of Klal Yisrael. It was represented by the king and the Sanhedrin and the Urim V'Tumim. And there's an individual leading his own private army and acquiring land. And they have different halachas. Kivbush yachid generally doesn't create sanctity to the land that the person conquers, but kivbush rabim does. So it's not as if I, as an individual, acquired the land there in Israel, because it retained its sanctity. Therefore, it retained the sanctity of the multitude conquering it, and it has the sanctity of Eretz Israel. Mefrish Trumas Meisers, ומביא בכורים. And you separate Trumas Meisers and you bring בכורים from whatever you grow on that land. והכל מן Torah, and everything is in the Torah. כאילו לא נמכר לעכו"ם מעולם, as if it were never sold to the non-Jew. ויש קניין לעכו"ם בסוריה, להפקיע מן המעשרות. However, in Syria, a place between Eretz Israel and Damascus, which has certain rabbinic halachos attached to it. We have to say Trumas Maisus, Midarabanan, and so on in that area. If a non-Jew acquires land there, he does eliminate the obligation to separate Trumas Maisus from it. Umin Hashvis, and not Shmita, Kmoshi Yispar, like we will explain. Now, this was brought in the Beis Yosef, as we saw previously explained. This was talking about only after the Jew purchases the land from the non-Jew, it regains its sanctity. But as long as it's in the hand of the non-Jew, the Beis Yosef explained that the Rambam does not say it has sanctity at that point, even though that doesn't seem to be the simplest reading of the Rambam. There is a Rishon, Sefer Truma, that was written by Reb Baruch, who lived most of his life in Worms. He was a Talmid, and maybe also a son, because his name is Baruch ben Yitzhak, of the Ri Hazaken, who was a great-grandson of Rashi. And he wrote a Sefer of Halacha and then a Sefer of Truma. And even though all of it isn't concerned with Eretz Israel, there is a section of it that's concerned with Eretz Israel. And there he writes, Di'i ein kinyan la'akum, that there is no possibility of a non-Jew acquiring land in Eretz Israel, kach shav karka shalakum, so that it will be considered non-Jewish land. Kamo karka shi Yisrael, it would retain its status of Jewish land. Or afilu shema ein kinyan le'akum, hainu ein haaretz omedes b'Kadosha, that if he acquires it, it's no longer Eretz Israel. It doesn't have sanctity, so he hasn't acquired something in Eretz Israel. Alvakeven to lo kidja im ken l'divrei hakol shema yesh kinyan la'akum להפקיע maser מדרבנן. But according to every opinion, the non-Jew has the ability to purchase the land, to uproot the obligation to separate Meiser, which is rabbinic in our time. Vada Pereka Kometz, and what did we learn in Pereka Kometz? Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Lech kach min ha'akum. Rabbi Tarfon said, go buy it from the non-Jew. V'aser alav, and separate Trumas Meiser from it. Dahavi Midarabanan. He's saying it's from rabbinic law that you would separate Trumas Meiser if you do the Gemar Malacha. Shema Saver Kidsha La'asi Lavo, because he is holding that when the Jews returned in the time of Ezra, they sanctified the land for then and forever. Originally, when they sanctified the land in the conquest of Yahushua, they sanctified it for its time, but only as long as the Jews were living on it. And during the exile, there was no sanctity of the land. When Ezra came back and he re-sanctified the land, he re-sanctified it forever. But there is a possibility, the Sefer Truma says, for a non-Jew to purchase the land and uproot the obligation of Trumas and Meisters and Shmita, as long as they are rabbinic in nature. And for this reason, we can say, the Sefer Truma continues, that in terms of shvis, it is permitted to plow and plant in the land that's owned by a non-Jew. A Jew can work for the non-Jews and plow and plant in his land, and they're even according to rabbis, meaning there's no rabbinic prohibition of doing some such thing. V'idetnan beperek hanizakin, and that we learned in Perek Hanizakin, the fifth perek of Gittin, ein odrin im akom b'shvis. Let's say you're not allowed to hoe the land, weed the land with the non-Jew on Shmita. Yisbor kidshalasid lava, because that Amora holds that was sanctified for them and for then and for forever. Afal pi she'ein yovel noheg, even though there's no yovel, mikom shvius noheges. Nonetheless, shvis applies. V'yityashev bekach, and we have to look into this and see whether, in fact, this is the Gemara Aliba de Hilchasa, going according to the halacha, or only according to this opinion. Perush Rabbeinu Shlomo beherek Zebor. How does Rabbeinu Shlomo, meaning Rashi, explain this in Perek Zebor? Kohen v'charish amar le matzi lememer agistun ani besocha. If you are, the phrase in Aramaic is difficult. Upirush, and Rashi explains there, schir akom ani, that when someone is seen working in a non-Jew's land, he can say, I am hired by the non-Jew to do this. And since I'm during Shmita, and since I'm hired by the non-Jew to work on his land, therefore there's no problem with me working the land, even though it's Shmita, even if it's plowing and planting or whatever. V'had machriz Rabbi Ami. And what is it that Rabbi Ami announced? Poku v'zaro b'shvis mishum arnona, that you should go and plant in the Shemitah year because of the Arnona. Kedei l'shalom l'melech hashbon chiyuv hatavua. So the king has a calculation of how much grain you have to pay him every year. And so you can be able to pay this. You can go and plant in the Shemitah year. Hainu afilu bekarka Yisrael. And he's talking about even on Jewish-owned land. Kaven deleke Yisrael midrabbanan, because there's only a rabbinic prohibition. And if Jewish land would be lost near Israel, the rabbis would not decree in such a case. Hilkach mishum arnona shari legamri. Therefore, if there is a tax that has to be paid, it is completely permitted to work this land. And there are several ways that the Sefer Truma can be understood. Let's not get into that now. Let's save that for a later discussion. Now, the Gemara that he quoted, that he said Rabbi Ami announced, go out and plant during the Shemitah, is found in Sanhedrin Daf Chafav Amud Aleph. However, which Amora is said this is quoted different ways by different Rishonim, and our Girsa is different. So according to the Sefer Truma, it's Rabbi Ami that said, go out and plant during the Shemitah year. Our Gemara, the Girsa in front of us, says, K'demachris Rabbi Yanai. Our Gemara says, Rabbi Yanai said that, Poku uzaro b'shvis mishum arnona. Go out and plant during the Shemitah year because of the taxes. Tosfos on that Gemara says, Miram mishirabu ha'anasin. When there were more people forcing us to do things, umanin hu arnona. And what is this ones? What is this thing that's forcing us? It's the taxes. Vim tomar mishum arnona hitiru lachroshes l'savoa dihi isud miduraisa. If you're saying because of tax, we are forced to do Torah prohibitions. Therefore, we have to say we're talking about Shmita in our time, which it certainly was in either Rabbi Yami or Rabbi Yanai's time, that Shmita was rabbinic in nature. Inami yesh lomer de pikuach nefeshu. Or you could similarly say that it was pikuach nefesh. It was a problem to their life, meaning if they didn't pay the king's tax, he might not only take the land, he might kill people and so on. Or the people might starve to death later, not having any land to grow crops on. Hu shashal lehem hamelech mas, when the king asks for the tax, ve'ein lehem ma yifra'u, and they can't pay it back, umesim b'tfisas melech, and then they will die in the king's custody. V'achi itmar mishum itmar b'Yerushalmi, and this is also what the Yerushalmi says, mishum chaye nefesh, so that people can live, we allow them to work the land during the Shmita year. There is another sefer from the Yerushalmi sefer, Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, Ein shvis no hagin le'inyan iser zriya v'charisha be'eretz Yisrael midraisa ela midrabbanan. The shvis doesn't apply concerning the prohibition of plowing and planting and sowing in Eretz Yisrael. From Torah law, in our time, it's only rabbinic in nature. Ub'sdei Yisrael hu da'aser. And it's only in a Jewish field, therefore, that it's aser. Aval lo b'sdei hagoy, but not in a non-Jewish field. V'im misdei Yisrael no heges no stim l'melech miktsas mikol sedei v'sedei. And if we have to give the king a tax from everything that's grown in each field, mutter lisroa, it's permitted to plant in that field. Kedikaris Rava, like Rava announced, puku v'zaro b'shvis mishum arnona, go out and plant during the Shmita year because of the tax. So you'll note now we have in Sefer Hilchos Eretz Yisrael it's Rava, in Sefer Truma it's Rabbi Ami, and in our Gemara it's Rabbi Yanai. So we have a three-way machlokas of which Amora it is. It is probably not Rava because he didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Ami both did live in Eretz Yisrael, so it's most likely it was one of the two of them and not Rava. But in any case, you see from the majority of the Rishonim that non-Jewish owned land doesn't have a prohibition of working on Shmita, and according to one Gemara and the Sefer Truma, and perhaps also the Sefer itself, and so on, there is no prohibition of a Jew working on non-Jewish land during the Shmita year. That wouldn't have a problem either. And we will have more discussions on this later. Everyone should have a wonderful day.